much, Christina and John, for the interdisciplinary research cluster for inviting me to share some ideas in this space. I am going to tell some stories about sediment, but before that, I think it's important to reflect really briefly about what a river is, because I'm not referring to sediment in general, but I want to talk about fluvial sediment that travels in rivers. So the first thing that, like usually we tend to think of rivers or to imagine rivers as lines on the map, and usually these lines are blue, which means that we have the expectations that rivers are sort of like transparent, or they have like a nice color. By imagining rivers as a line, and also that they have some sort of particular, sort of like kind of homogeneous type of water, we tend to imagine rivers in a very simplified way. And actually, a glossary type of definition of what a river is might be like this: like a river is a large natural stream of water flowing over the surface and normally contained within a river channel. So a lot of rivers in the world might be like this, and they are easily identified. They're very easy to identify, and the channel is very easy to discern. And actually, you can see a line, right? And basically, the line is the channel, and then the water is flowing through this. But a lot of rivers in the world are not like that. So what happens with the idea of rivers in the case of a river like this, whose channel is very difficult to discern, and also its water is far from homogeneous. Water is actually very heterogeneous, and also in the same river you can find a different kind of colors and textures and forms and shapes and all that. So when I realized that about this diversity of rivers, then I realized also that rivers are not only water that is flowing in a channel, as the previous definition of a river is saying, and also it's basically we imagine rivers as water only, but all rivers are also sediment, and especially in tropical rivers, sediment plays a really crucial role, not only in the biophysical dynamics of the river, but also in the way in which people experience the river. So I am going to focus on that because in one of the rivers where I have been working over the last 2 decades, before the pandemic, when I was there, I was visiting the region, and then people was telling me a story that had just happened. Like a few days earlier, the river sort of rose and fell like in less than 24 hours, which is really unusual, and is very difficult to explain from the perspective of river sciences, for instance. But that happened for a reason that they don't know. We don't know yet what happened. But the most striking thing was that after that happened, then there was this huge amount of sediment that was accumulated in the landscape. And for the people living in this river, which is the San Jorge River in northern Colombia, in the Caribbean region, this phenomena was a part of another series of events that were basically telling them that the river is dying. Why is the river dying? Because there is more sediment than before, and the river is flowing much more slower. So sediment is changing the life of people in this part of the world. So I came to sort of realize that about the importance of the river, of sediment in river systems, but also in people's lives, in the people who live in these rivers lives. So sediment, there are many different ways to define sediment, but there are at least 3 characteristics that I want to highlight. The first is that sediment is a solid material. Sediment is a solid material which is moved from one place to another by natural processes and other elements such as wind, water, ice, or gravity. And erosion is probably the main force that moves sediment. This means that sediment is movement, is something that is moving. Second, the relief of the Earth's surface is constantly molded by the erosion, transport, deposition, and consolidation of sediment. We have sedimented landscapes. And the morphology of rivers, for instance, is the result of the interaction between water and sediments. Without sediment, there is no channel. So that means that sediment is transformation. And finally, sediment is generally composed of rocks, minerals, and debris of plant and animals. And therefore, it is crucial to various ecological processes. This means that sediment is actually an assemblage of a lot of things. Sediment is very important today for many reasons. And one of these is because sand, which is a form of sediment, is today the single most mined material in the world, surpassing other widely extracted materials such as coal or oil. So we are extracting like large amounts of sediment from rivers to for a lot of different reasons, to the point that we are transforming landscapes all over the world, which are because of all of these large amounts of sediment that we are extracting. Actually, sediment became a global commodity, and in that way, it's a commodity that is extracted massively from rivers. And that means that sediment in the form of sand, for instance, is traveling from rivers for places where there is new land being created with this sediment. For just to basically to create and to sustain the expansion of cities and generally speaking, like places where there is a lot of investments of capital. But in this journey, like sediment traveling from one place to another place, while some people gain land, such as in this case in Singapore, for instance, that Singapore is growing because of that physically. So while some people gain land, others lose it. In the case, for instance, the Mekong River, where a lot of the sediment that is deposited in Singapore is being extracted from. So in this journey, a lot of people lose it, and sand mining, among other effects, accelerates riverbank erosion, and that is basically threatening the material foundation of social life to a lot of people. Another way in which sediment matters a lot today is because dams, the proliferation of dams is transforming sedimented landscapes. So dams interrupt the flux of sediment through rivers, and that is increasingly starving deltas of sediment, and this results in oceans eroding and devouring deltas where a lot of people live. So this is very critical. So because of that, workings like almost more than 10 years ago argue that humans are now an order of magnitude more important at moving sediment than the sum of all other natural processes operating on the surface of the planet. So to sum up, sediment tells stories about humans and also about the earth, the transformation of the earth. Some scientists, such as paleoecologists and climatologists, they take this they take sediment's potential to tell stories very seriously. So they see sediment as a natural archive of past changes. So they extract sediment from, for instance, the bottom of lakes in order to understand and to analyze and to read the record of past organisms, climate changes, vegetation, and other environmental processes. So basically, scientists read the history of both the Earth and humanity in sedimentary natural archives, and they store this sediment as in physical archives. In the case of the social sciences, where I was trained as a human geographer, sediment is also playing an important role. It's also sort of like a window into history. But in this case, sediment is not a material reality. Sediment is a metaphor. So it's a metaphor that helps us understand how historical time consists of multiple layers upon which events and human experiences unfold. So basically, the human experience gets sedimented over history and over time in the same way as sediment gets deposited and accumulated in the landscape. But then, with all of this picture and all of these multiple ways in which sediments are important, from the biophysical sciences to the social sciences, then there is an important question that came to my mind, is what kind of human experiences What does sediment tell about the future of those subjects whose lives are deeply intertwined with the flux and accumulation of this element? In the area where I saw that sediment was very important in the field, so what kind of things can sediment tell about the future of these people? And also, more specifically, what does it mean to live in a place where sediment is not just a metaphor explaining historical time, but a material that constantly moves, transforms, accumulates, and intertwines with landscapes, people's histories, and everyday experiences. In order to try to answer this question, so I will refer to some places where I have been working for a long time in the Colombian Caribbean. For that, I want to reflect very briefly about a concept that has been very useful to me to understand that human experience of sediment, but that is not coming from nowhere. It's a concept that people use a lot to explain their relationship with rivers and sediments. And that is the idea of force, which in Spanish is fuerza. And force, for instance, in the case of Nuris, who is a mangrove farmer, and she's a single mother of 3 kids. She lives in a very small village, which is located where a stream branching of the Magdalena River, which is the most important river in Colombia, where the Magdalena, where this stream meets the ocean, and large amounts of sediments from the Magdalena River used to flow through this stream, and therefore the large amount of sediment used to counteract the force of the ocean, the erosive force of the ocean. So a lot of sediment was flowing, and then the ocean was basically eating the sediment, and then more sediment was coming as in a sort of balance. But then almost 20 years ago, the stream got clogged. So there was no more sediment or fresh water flowing towards this area, and therefore the ocean began to devour the community because there was no sediment to counteract the force of the ocean. So therefore, as the ocean was eating the community, then the ocean ate Nuri's house. In 2020, Hurricane Iota hit the Caribbean, and the ocean became much stronger. Therefore, it devastated several houses at this village, and one of the houses was Nuri's house. When that happened, she sent me a message saying, Alejandro, my house was destroyed and I have no force left. I lost my house for the second time because it has already happened before. So she built her house with her own hands, then the ocean destroyed the house, and then she built the house again, and then during Iota, then the ocean destroyed the house again. So she says, I have no force to rebuild my house again. For the people in the Caribbean, the idea of force is very important, or is very common to express this kind of situations in which to express not only that they are physically exhausted, but also that there is also some emotions that are being exhausted because their force is much weaker than the force of other forces in nature, from the force of the river, the force of the ocean, but also they use it a lot to express when the idea that they don't have money. So when they say, like, I have no force, means that they don't have money, that they are in a critical economic situation. So this combination of economics and also emotions and also the physical capability to cope with what is going on in the environment is encapsulated in the idea of force. But force is also widely used today in the literature and also in the way in which we explain what is going on in the world, because we are supposed to be a geological force. So the idea of force has become very popular because we have changed the earth through our force to the point that we became a force, our geological force. But this force is sort of like the convergence of a lot of forces: the force of capitalism, the force of racialization, the force of dispossession, the force of gendering, and the force of environmental destruction. So we are depicted today as a major force. But for Nuris, and also for other people in the Colombian Caribbean, they would not feel part of that almighty humanity that has such a strong force. And they don't feel that way because for them, the force of the river and the force of the ocean is stronger than them. And therefore, these forces bring about a lot of ruin, exhaustion, and also it basically erodes the foundations of their own life. So through sediment and through the idea of force, people basically tell stories about life and death, and I'm going to explain that. So going back to the river that got sedimented overnight and that is bringing a lot of sediments. I visited this area for the first time like 20 years ago, and I was in this part of the river, which was a much wider river, but now it's becoming a little, is losing depth, and also is becoming sort of like smaller because of the large amounts of sediment. And that is very critical to people because the river was their home. They used to bath in the river. They used to wash the clothes in the river, but they can no longer do that because when they try to bath, they get all dirty and the clothes become really, really dirty because of these large amounts of sediment. And also the river was basically a place to make a living for the fishers. So they used to fish and they live in this place. So rivers were this kind of, this part of the river was a highly dynamic place for the fishing economy in the area, which is sustaining the livelihoods of a lot of people. So the everyday life in of these families, of these people, unfolds as the river rises and falls, and expands and contracts, and also overflows and dries up throughout the year. And also as sediment travels in the river, accumulates, and also transforms the morphology of the river. So in this picture, for instance, this is sort of like a dynamic picture in which you can see how the river is moving or horizontally, not only it rises and falls, but also it moves horizontally in different ways, right? Because sediment shapes the landscape in different ways. But for them, going back to that scene that the river is getting sedimented, for them, the river is dying. But if the river dies, according to the people from the region, everything is going to die. And why is the river dying? Because the river is moving slower. And once the river stops, everything is going to die. The economy, the social life, and a lot of problems will emerge. And also because there won't be fish flowing in the river, which is very important to local economies. And sediment is very important because it makes the river inhabitable to a lot of species, but too much sediment becomes a real problem. And they know that the river is going to die, not because they have not because they can guess that it's going to happen or because they think that it's going to happen. They know the river is going to die because they already had experienced the death of the river almost 50 years ago. So the sediment was basically bringing the evidence of something that had already happened long ago. So during the 1950s, this is the San Jorge River, and it's not a very clear image. But then the red square is marking the bifurcation of the river. So in the 50s, or until the 50s, the river used to flow to the right. And then to the left, there was like a very, very small stream. But for different reasons, in the 70s, the river changed its channel, and then it started flowing to the left instead of flowing to the right as the river used to flow before. And that basically changed everything in the region. This is a roller picture. So the white spot, Boca de la Metra, is where the red square was. So the blue line is the new river, and then the yellow line is the old river. So in the area where the river is flowing today, there has been a lot of problems because the river is transporting so much sediment that the wetlands is losing their depth. So they are getting full of sediment, and that means that there is new land emerging in these places. And then there are a lot of conflicts between fishers and peasants and also landowners over the ownership of these places. because it's new land, so they basically different actors try to make their own property, and then they fight over because these are very fertile lands for grass and also for crops and for other usages. But even though that is a very dramatical situation, and this is a conflict that is still going on, the real concern for the people from that part of the river I already mentioned is what happened to the dead channel. So this is where the red square was before in the previous image. So to the right was the river. It was the river, but not today is the dead river. They call it this way. The river lost its force in this place, and therefore sediment took over. So there is only a little water sometimes after during the rainy time. So there is a little water, but the water doesn't flow as before. So sediment is taking over like progressively to the point that there are some places where there is no more water anymore. And therefore there are some conflicts over the ownership of these places. But for the people living along the river, life in general vanished as the river died. So this is where the river used to flow before, and there is only grass at this moment. And a lot of the people who used to live there, they have migrated elsewhere, because when the river died, everything died. The local economy disappeared because the river was very important. It was a very important place for the exchange of goods and commodities, and also for the transportation of people, and also the flow of fish. So it was very important. So once the river dried up, so everything disappeared, and people just left the place. So there is only one small community in the dead river, and they persist to be there, but they have the expectation that someday the river will be back. So they say, well, the government should do something about it. Maybe they just should dredge and try to open the channel again. But they are staying there because they think that sometime in the future, the river will be back. Everybody wants that. Everybody has this, is mourning the river. And at the same time, everybody wants the river to resuscitate at some point, except this woman. She's Maria, and she lives there. She has been living there her whole life. But she's the only person in the whole region that is happy about the death of the river. And why is she happy? Because when she was little, she fell into the river and she almost died. So from that time on, every night when she was little, she saw a man coming from the river that tried to scare her and kidnap her. So she thinks that the river should not be resuscitated. So she lives right next to the channel, and every day she dumps all of the domestic waste into the river to accelerate the sedimentation of the river, so that the river is preventing the river from returning. But for the rest of the people, they dream of the day in which the river is back. So while these people is mourning the river, and the other people from the other part of the river are really afraid of the death of that part of the river because of the previous story that they already know. So the people who are living where the new river is, where the river is born at this moment, because previously in those images with the red square, so that's the story of a river which died, but then another river was born. And this is the San Jorge River. So one of the things I want to show is that there is no one river, right? Even though we see just a line on the landscape, there is no one single river. There is a dead river and there is a new river. So in that case, the river died, and then it was born elsewhere. So where is the new river born at this moment? If the river is dying in the place I showed, so what is happening elsewhere? Where is the river going to? So this is the place, another place where there is another bifurcation. So to the left is the river that got a lot of sediment recently. Then to the right is the place where the river is becoming the new river. And since the river is is flowing towards that area, so the force is much more stronger right now, and is destroying a community. People think that they feel that the riverbed is becoming deeper and deeper and deeper, and they are really afraid of that. So we did some, I don't know what the name of this in English, bathymetria, is how to understand the morphology of the riverbed, trying to identify these places which are becoming deeper. So therefore, this is the bifurcation place. So to the right is the new river, and then to the left you see that the riverbed has less depth. So you don't see too much morphology to the right because the riverbed is deeper, right? And it wasn't the contrary; it was the opposite before everything started to change. So everything started to change because of a catastrophic floods in 2010, which was like a big event in Colombia's history. So catastrophic floods destroy a lot of things in this area, but one of the consequences of that is that it changed the landscape. So new streams appear and others disappear, and the wetlands change the shape and everything after the big flood. And a lot of houses were destroyed. So in this place, because of that, so the river destroyed a lot of things there, so they built a lot of infrastructures. And this infrastructure, basically what they are doing is that they are displacing the force of the river towards another direction. And in that direction, there is a community, another community, which is called Cuiva. And this community is a fishing community that I visited for the first time in 2003. And they live near a small stream, and it was a fishing village. But now, like 20 years after when I was there, the community is disappearing because the stream became the river. There is the new river, and they already call it the river. This is a very dramatic situation because the community is disappearing, because the land upon which this community rests is becoming fluvial sediment again. It was fluvial sediment in the past that accumulated in this place, and now it solidified, it became land, and now it's disappearing and it's becoming fluvial sediment again. It's disintegrating, the sediment is disintegrating. And therefore the life in this place is also disappearing. So this is the house where I stayed like 20 years ago, and it had like a huge backyard, and now the backyard is gone, along with almost 3 streets. This is how the community looks from above, and then the red line, the yellow line, was the edge of the community 20 years ago. So everything is disappearing because the force of the river is turning land into sediment, again, fluvial sediment. So dissolution is the experience of life at this moment in this place. So dissolution is the way in which a lot of people also experience sediment in addition to erosion. Going back to Nuri's story in the community that is being eaten by the ocean, this is a very important community because of its location. It is in where the red star is, and then you see the Magdalena River to the right. So that canal is called the Dique Canal, and today the Dique Canal is the place where one of the most ambitious projects is being developed at this moment, and it has been very controversial. It was initially, this is happening after the floods I mentioned in 2010, because the canal collapsed and it flooded a huge area. So after that, the Colombian government hired a Dutch company to try to fix the problem of this canal, and also because this canal is getting a lot of sediment from the Magdalena River, and sediment makes navigation really difficult. So there is a lot of oil that is supposed to navigate from the Magdalena River to the ocean, towards the left, which is Cartagena, located, a very important touristic city in Colombia. And there is so much sediment that is not possible to navigate in the way in which the government expects. And also because of the amount of sediment, so some wetlands have disappeared, etc., etc. So this is the community where Nuri lives. And it's a very small community of 500 people. And this community also is experiencing the dissolution of their own land because the ocean is eating the community. So the houses are progressively disappearing. This is how the community looked like in 2005. And let's see if I can. So here is the community. It's called Boca Cerrada. And as you can see, they have this sort of sediment bar here, which was protecting the community from the ocean. So there was a lot of sediment being deposited here, and then it was protecting the communities. But once the stream got clogged, then we have this situation. The sediment bar is gone, and then the community is disappearing. But another important change here is what you, maybe if you look closely, then you can see these kind of patches here. And back then, it was small plots of land for agriculture. So they used to cultivate the banks of the stream because it was fresh water flowing. Since there is no more fresh water, so the ocean, there is saltwater intrusion. So all of that is very salty. And all of these crops and all of these plots of land for subsistence agriculture, they turn into mangrove. So now mangrove is all over the place, and then agriculture disappeared. And since mangrove is sort of like the global, is sort of like a global fetish for conservation, so they cannot cut the mangrove, they cannot do anything with the mangrove because it's a conservation area. So conservation also came once the stream clogged. So those land, all of that land that disappeared is in the memory of people, and is basically recorded in photographs. For instance, this photo is of these people in the place that had already disappeared. This was a part of the area that is gone. So they keep the photos. It's sort of like to remember that there was land before and the land is gone now. And that land was important because it was the place to play soccer and also to work and to do other things. But now, since agriculture is gone, so everything, all of the whole domestic economy is relying on fishing and so fishing in the ocean, because they used to fish in the stream as well because it was freshwater fishing, but now everything is gone. So their livelihoods exclusively rely upon fishing in the ocean, which is becoming really scarce as well. So they basically, there are some times where fishing is good and other times is really precarious, and all of the food, tomatoes, onions, all of that, they have to be brought from elsewhere. And this community has no roads because it's surrounded by the ocean and then by mangrove, so they cannot open a new road because they will have to cut the mangrove. So everything is by water, and gasoline is very expensive in Colombia, so that makes food very expensive as well. So they are in a very critical situation. In the meantime, they try to do something to sort of decelerate the disappearance of their own place. So they try to put some of these bags with sand and other things to try to counteract the force of the ocean. But of course, the ocean is much more stronger. So when there is a hurricane or something, the whole community gets flooded. And women who used to work in agriculture, now they go to the mangrove to try to find some species to sell in the market or something like that in Cartagena and in other places. But the stream sometimes after a rainy period, it becomes a little fresh. Some fresh water comes to the community, so they take advantage of the situation to take a bath, to get the water for their homes, etc., etc. But everything is slowly disintegrating and disappearing. This is the church whose roof was disappeared because of a hurricane. The cemetery is all slowly disappearing as well. There are some corpses that are no longer there because the ocean took them away. And she's noticed. And this is the second house I knew, the house that disappeared when she sent me the message. And when I visited her house, the ocean was already very close, and she was very proud of her house because it was the nicest house in the community, because she built the house with her own hands, and she painted it, and she drew the stars and flowers and all that. But every time I went to this place, the ocean was closer and closer and closer and closer, to the point that it was like this, like the ocean there was already removing the ground. And it was one of the latest pictures I took of this place, that the ocean was already entering her house, and then finally the house disappeared. And then the community, as the other community that is basically dreaming of the day in which the river is back, so this community is dreaming of the day in which sediment is back and is flowing back through the stream. So they go to the place where the stream got clogged, and they, with their own hands, they try to remove the sediment and all of the debris that is clogging the stream with their own hands. And that helps some fresh water to flow a little bit, but then 2 days later, again, everything is clogged. But they try to do it, to do this. So right now there is this big project going on to fix the Dickey Canal, and they are going to build this. They will build 2 locks to control the flow of sediment and water. And this is a really, really, really massive project, and it looks like this. So this is a lock, and this will be a lock, another lock, and then Boca Cerrada is around here. So this means that this is going to change a lot of the dynamics of the area, and a lot of more water is going to flow through this, and they are going to unclog the stream. But it sounds like a good news, but it is actually really bad news, because this is going to flood the whole community, because there will be so much water flowing through this canal that the community will be flooded. So it will disappear anyways. So talking to a Dutch expert who was involved in this project, he described this community as an inviolable community. He said, there is nothing we can do there. This is an inviolable community, and they just have to live. Otherwise, the water is going to make them disappear. People, of course, are opposing this project because this is undermining people's rights in many ways, and this is going to accelerate saltwater intrusion in other parts, and is going to destroy agriculture. So there is right now a little controversies. But as the river, the force of the river is eroding the banks, and the stream is also has disappeared in these places. The force of the ocean is destroying the place. People in their everyday lives, they still try to maintain the reproduction of lions in itself. So they still grow food on the banks of the river, on the banks of the streams that are still available for agriculture. This is the new house that Nuris built. When she told me that she has no forest left, then couple months later, she started building her house again in another place, far from the beach. But she knows that there will be a time in the near future in which the house will be destroyed, because the ocean is every day closer and closer and closer. But in the meantime, she keeps growing mangrove, and in the community, since everything is so salty, sometimes they go to another place, another part of the stream, to try to find some sediment from fresh water, because it is very useful to grow medicinal plants and some natural spices and plants for cooking and for medicine and all that. So basically, in these areas, these stories about sediment are stories about how sediment sort of like encapsulate stories about life and death, and people are all the time trying to live between this kind of tension between life and death, which mediates the relationship with sediment. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Alejandro. Thank you for that interesting and thought-provoking presentation. I think now we can open up to questions and comments from both people who are online and those who are here in the room. So if you'd like to ask a question, please, raise your hand if you're online, or anyone here in the room like to ask a question? Jimena, I think, has a question for you. Oh, you have to, I think, turn to the mic.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So my question is related to these changes in the dynamics of the river, to what degree they respond to natural dynamics, and to what degree they respond to human dynamics. So I guess in the catchment of the San Jorge River, I saw in the pictures that you showed us a lot of human activities and settlements like agriculture and other settlements. Are there any water deviations? Are there I guess, exploitation of sand, as you mentioned, in the catchment? Is this affecting the trajectory of the river? And I guess,
That
is that to what degree this impacts the change of the river and the communities that you mentioned? Thank you.
that's another long story, because it's interesting, because sediment, for like scientists, sedimentation is one of the most natural processes, and it is described in that way. That's why the sediment is called a natural archive. Sediment is a very important place to naturalize nature for a lot of scientists. So they say sedimentation is natural. It's part of the natural life of a river, right? We need sediment. So one of the big problems, for instance, in the Cauca River here is because the dam is basically reducing the amount of the sediment, and this is causing a lot of ecological and social problems. So it's interesting because in terms of the scientific narratives about sediment, it's a very nice, interesting place to understand the naturalization of nature. So when I talk to people about why is all of this happening, right? Because I didn't refer to that question. Why is all this happening? So there are a lot of ideas, and one of them is that for instance, why is sedimentation growing so fast? So they say because of mining. So the San Jorge River, there is a place called Ayapel, and then there is mining going on in Ayapel, and so people say mining is causing this, because they are basically transforming the river in many ways, gold mining. But people also say because of deforestation, deforestation in the river, and then since there is so much water in this area and there are so many wetlands, so there are some small interventions that people do in the river to open a new channel, to divert water here and there. So that might also, like, for instance, like cattle ranchers, they know how sedimentation works. So they try to open like new branches, like new streams, so that they accelerate sedimentation of wetlands. And that is what is happening right now. So some wetlands have been sedimented because of the new channel of the river that is sort of like is cutting the wetlands, but also some wetlands are disappearing because people, like basically cattle ranchers, they are interrupting the communication between the wetland and the river, so they accelerate sedimentation. So people understand how that works, and they take advantage of that. So, but there is we don't have studies about that, at least in the San Jorge River, because sediment is so fascinating because it's also an element with a lot of gaps in the existing knowledge, scientific knowledge. Like scientists don't know a lot of things about sediment, so they have to create models that they suppose a lot of things. There are a lot of things that are taken for granted, or they don't know very well. There are a lot of gaps in the knowledge. So the people who study sediment, they acknowledge that they don't know a lot of things about sediment, how sediment behaves and all that. It's a fascinating work. But we also don't know too much about why is all of this happening, at least in this river, in the San Jorge River. So these are stories that people tell. Like in the 90s, there was I forgot the name in English, avalanche. It's like an avalanche of sediment that was flowing through the river, and that killed a lot of fish. That was a catastrophe. But people thought that the fish was dead because it was poisoned. So nobody ate the fish, and the fish was basically dying because of the high amount of sediment. So some people say that chunks of land were, falling off from the banks in the upper side of the river because of deforestation. So it was so much land falling into the river that it created like this catastrophe. It was a catastrophe. A lot of fish died, and people was just scared about why a fish died. But then after that, some people trace the origin of sedimentation back to that event, which happened in 1988 or something like that. So the story of sedimentation for a lot of people started in that event when they saw so much sediment in the water and killing fish. So there is no single answer for that, but for sure there is a lot of human activity contributing to the sedimentation of the river.
Gracias, Alejandro. ¿Alguien más tiene una pregunta o un comentario? Pablo, por favor, adelante.
Bueno, primero que nada, muchas gracias, Alejandro, por la plática. I'm going to ask the question in English, but I love the talk. I think it's super interesting. I think you already started thinking about this and telling us a little bit about this in your previous answer, but I wanted to hear more about how your conceptualization of fuerza or force, right, is in many ways destabilizing sort of common knowledges or common ideas about agency between human and non-human elements. And I think the way that you're layering sort of those intersections is really compelling, and to me seems to be a significant contribution to sort of environmental humanities and environmental studies more broadly. So I just wanted to hear more about how you're thinking about agency in relation to your talk, and if you're thinking about it at all, or if perhaps fuerza or force is your own sort of contribution in terms of getting at some of these similar questions, but in a different way. Yeah, that's the question. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's what you ask is at the center of my conceptual reflections about sediments, because I call force a confluence concept. Because in force, there is a confluence of people's vocabulary, everyday vocabulary. It's also the way in which we describe what is going on in the world right now. We talked about the forces of capitalism, the Anthropocene, all of that I mentioned earlier. But also for the people who study sediment, the idea of force is very important too. So it's a confluence concept because it's a concept that can allows us to bring together different forms of knowledge to explain something that is of interest to people and also to scientists. So when talking about force, then the question of agency emerges. And I think force is interesting because force is a relationship. Right? There is no something intrinsic in things or people that is called force. Force is a relationship. There is also an equation. Force is a product of something else, right? So the force of the river is not, the force of the river is not intrinsic to the river because the river can lose its force when something else happens, and the river can die. So force is relational. And force help us understand how people connect with nature, also with the environment, because it's relational. So the force of water, one of my prior reflections about water is that you don't see water by itself in nature. You always see water with something else, right? And I've been studying floods for a long time. And at some point I was saying like, and that is in my dissertation, like, and now I don't like that idea, is that if there is something that can illustrate the agency of water, is floods, because floods are destructive. But then when I started understanding floods, well, floods are the consequence of gravity, of a lot of things, the morphology of the landscapes and the topography and everything. It's not something called floods that happen because of its own will. So the name of when Christina invited me and said, this is an interdisciplinary research cluster, I said, well, this is nice because I've been forced to move beyond the boundaries of my own disciplines and training to try to understand the biophysical work of all of these elements. And by understanding that, like, sediment moves and flies, and because of the action of gravity, of wind, and all of things, and erosion is a relationship between things also, right? So force is useful in that way. And I know that the discussions about agency are now beyond the idea that agency is something intrinsic to blah, blah, because people say, no, agency is more than that. But still, I think force help us have a more relational, dynamic, and also historical idea about people-environment relationship. And by saying that, I admit that this is something I am still elaborating on. This is not definitive. I am still thinking about this a lot. And when I do these presentations, I have a lot of questions after. And this is supposed to be a paper. But I'm still thinking about it. But thank you. Yeah, that makes me think much more about the conceptual and theoretical implications of talking about force. But the fact that this is a confluence concept to me is already a very important starting point think of this.
Gracias, Alejandro. Interesante. Tulio, yo creo que tú también tienes una pregunta.
Sí, gracias. Muchas gracias, Alejandro, por una charla súper interesante. La verdad que todavía no tengo muy bien formuladas mis preguntas, pero y tal vez por eso como que creo que son tres, pero tal vez están relacionadas. La primera pregunta tiene que ver con cómo entender tal vez, o digamos, ¿cuáles crees vos que son las mejores herramientas para abordar el tema de despojos ocasionados por la naturaleza? En tu anterior respuesta a Jimena, digamos, puede ser que algunas de las causas relacionadas con el cambio de los sedimentos en el río tengan que ver con human activity, como mining o dredging en otras áreas o deforestación, pero tal vez no. Digamos, estaba pensando durante tu charla en esa pintura que hay del Mississippi River con todos los cursos que tuvo el río a lo largo de los años. Y no es, como vos decís, no es un río, parece mucho, en realidad parece como una trenza, ¿no? Entonces, digo, también hay razones que tal vez no tienen que ver con la actividad humana que explican que los ríos cambian curso, que los ríos se mueven, que los ríos no son estáticos. Y eso me lleva a pensar cómo hacemos para entender las consecuencias de esas acciones. Si, por ejemplo, el concepto de despojo es útil. Yo estaba en el norte de Salta preguntándole a comunidades Wichí en enero si sentían presión de los criollos, presión sobre tu territorio de los criollos. Y las mujeres me decían, no, la presión es del río. O sea, vale decir, lo que les preocupa que las corra de donde están es el río, no el despojo de otros miembros de la zona o de otros grupos étnicos de la zona. Entonces, mi pregunta no está bien formulada, pero es si debemos tener como diferentes categorías para lidiar con despojos que son ocasionados por la naturaleza, que no está relacionada con actividades humanas, de los despojos que están relacionados con actividades humanas. La segunda pregunta es si en esa área o en algún otro lugar se ha pensado en la relocación de la comunidad toda. En esa área donde yo estaba, que es junto al río Pilcomayo, una de las comunidades, bueno, varias comunidades en realidad, porque hubo un flood súper grande en el 88, otro muy grande en el 2018, y como consecuencia del 2018, varias comunidades fueron relocated completely. And these are indigenous communities that have, an ancestral tie to the land, but they have been moved like 3 or 4 kilometers from where they were. So you can go and see, the ruins of La Curvita, which look a lot like some of your photos, particularly the one of the church. And then you go 3 or 4 kilometers away and it's a new community, La Nueva Curvita. I don't know if it's easier in that context because, they have a cacique and the whole community moves than if it's individuals. So I was also wondering, what is these communities that you are studying, how are they organized sort of above the individual level? And finally, and I hinted at this in my previous question, is if you have done any comparative work to look at other rivers that change course, such as the Mississippi, the Pilcomayo, other rivers that keep moving a lot. And I assume there must be many. So sorry, I was going back and forth between English and Spanish, everyone. Sorry for that.
I think I'm going to answer in English because probably someone in the Zoom doesn't. Cristina, ¿qué ibas a decir?
No, te iba a decir que sí, hay una persona que prefería inglés.
So the first question about the idea of dispossession, and also about the fact that the river moves. That's one of the most basic things about tropical rivers, and especially in floodplains, in plain areas, is that rivers move all the time. And I live near the Magdalena River, which is the most important. And then there is this bridge that was built right before the pandemic, and then during the pandemic, when the president was to announce publicly about the bridge, the river was already moved. The river had already moved, and it was moving towards one of the banks, and then that was supposed to destabilize the bridge. So I'm not an engineer, I'm not an earth scientist, I'm not nothing like that, and I know that. So it was a surprise to me. Why don't these people and why they didn't sort of understand that the river was going to move itself, right? The rivers move all the time, and that's a very basic principle. Well, I don't have an answer for that, but there are some like different cases. I wrote about one of these cases in which the sedimentation created conflicts over property right. I mentioned that briefly. I wrote an article about that, and one of the inspirations to me was the work of Catherine Verdery, because she studied a similar case in Romania, where a river moved, and then there was this big debate about the property of the lands and ownership. And so what are we going to do now that the river moved? Because sometimes we think of rivers, since we imagine rivers as a line, so sometimes we take rivers as a boundary also, right? To sort of like to set the limits to ownership. But what happens when the river moves? What happens with the boundaries of property, right? And that has happened in many places. But here, this is something that happens all the time. And that has posed a lot of challenges to scientists, because how to draw the boundaries of a wetland in a place where wetlands are moving all the time, and how to draw the boundaries of the river in a place where the rivers are moving all the time. Like they move on like every year, there is something that changed in this region after the rainy season. And during the floods in 2010, it was crazy, because there were new streams in places that they didn't have streams before, and the wetlands changed their shape. So everything changed. So when they try to model the area of these wetlands, next year everything has changed already. So it's such a big challenge. And also it has to do with the fact that we tend to imagine the property of land as something that is fixed in space, right? Like your house has, like you know what are the limits of your house, right? On the land. But when we think of property in those terms, and then we go to these regions, that becomes sort of like useless, because we cannot explain property in those terms. So there are a lot of instances of dispossession. I didn't mention too much about that, but there is land restitution things going on here. And then for the first time, there's a lot of corruption involved, but for the first time a couple of years ago, a functionary was sent to jail because he granted a property title to a landowner, a cattle rancher in a wetland area. And they removed the fact that there was an area from the deed, from the title. So when you read the title, you don't see a wetland because they remove it. So they kind of disappear nature in paper. And then, but people know. And so they sort of like file a lawsuit against this guy saying like they removed the wetland from the document, but the wetland is there. So he basically ended up owning a wetland. So the functionary was sent to jail because of that. And that was very important, because now before people didn't want to denounce this, because they say, okay, this is, the same owners of these farms, they are the same people who are in politics here and are close to the mayor, and they are close to the head of the state institution in charge of land titling and all that. In terms of the relocation, nudist community, for instance, when this Dutch guy says this community is inviolable, it's not because he thinks that, it's because everybody thinks that, like in the government and the Dutch company and all of the experts that have been advising this project from other places and other countries. There is in this community, so there is no agriculture. They have to get the food from elsewhere, much more expensive. They rely only on fishing. They don't have an aqueduct. They don't have access to clean water. They have just a school with 2 rooms, and then all of the elementary school happens there. And high school, they have to go to Cartagena or to another place. There is no, they don't have like a hospital. Like they have nothing in this place, nothing. There is no, you don't have latrines. I forgot, like restroom. You don't have that. People go to the monte, as they say, right? They go to the mangrove. So the big question is, why do they persist? Why do they want to stay there? Despite the fact that they know, everybody knows that the community is going to disappear because of the force of the ocean, and they have nothing in the community. And then the big question is why they want to stay there, despite all of these precarious conditions. So the people say that this community, since they don't have roads, the only way to get there is by water. So they say, if we accept the relocation, they are going to send us to urban areas, or they will have to migrate to Cartagena. And Cartagena is a really, really difficult city. It's a very racist city, and this is Afro-Colombian people, and they have special rights and all that, but the reality of Cartagena is another story. So they say, we go to Cartagena, our kids will start joining gangs, and they will have drugs much closer, and they will have to pay rent. There is no property, like fixed property in this place. Like for instance, Noris built their house here, and then she goes to another place, and then she builds the house there, and nobody's gonna say anything. They say, we go there, then we have to pay rent, we have to pay utilities, we have to pay a lot of things. Cartagena has like a very unsafe places, like the poorest places are very unsafe, so they will have to live in the poorest places, and the kids will be involved in drugs and all that, so they know. And they say, at least if I don't have fish today, someone else, my neighbor, is going to give me fish. We might have been having arguments and all that, but when it comes to food, people share their food. And that is not going to happen in Cartagena, where probably they will be living with people they don't know. And well, that's one of the main reasons, but they refuse relocation, even though they know that at some point they will have to do it anyways.
Hola, Alejandro, yo tengo 2 preguntas. Creo que podemos hablar en español ahora. Pues me pareció muy interesante porque, bueno, digo, en comparación con el contexto donde tú sabes que donde yo trabajo, donde hay una, casi históricamente, un deseo de tratar de mantener la montaña, el sedimento, o sea, obstaculizar la bajada, ¿cierto? Y esa es la perspectiva de todos los humanos después de la colonización. Hasta ahora que ya hay debate sobre dejar el agua y el sedimento regresar, porque el agua de todas formas está en el retorno y violentamente recuperando sus espacios. Pero digo, históricamente es una perspectiva, pero en tu caso es muy interesante porque tienes comunidades que quieren el sedimento y comunidades que no quieren el sedimento. Entonces yo digo, pues ese choque al mismo tiempo, en la temporalidad contemporánea, sí, como, ¿cómo ves eso? ¿Cuál sería como una solución desde la política pública, o cómo se puede abordar ese tipo de total conflictos oposicionales en relación al sedimento que viene y los que no quieren ver el sedimento ni en pintura? Sí, como, no sé, eso, como interesante. Esa es la primera pregunta, después de mencionar la segunda.
¿Cuál es la segunda?
Bueno, la segunda es como, bueno, en el contexto donde yo trabajo, es pura, la respuesta ha sido ingeniería, ingeniería, ingeniería. violento, o sea, es violencia, porque es la idea de que a través de la infraestructura vamos a controlar todas esas fuerzas que tú mencionas. Tanto las fuerzas de miedo de las personas, de duelo de las personas, como las fuerzas biofísicas y todo. Pero entonces me gustaría saber si tú has visto un ejemplo de los científicos, otro modelo de su no saber, de manejar eso, en vez de tratar de simplemente imponer como con cierta autoridad que es falsa, que tú estás diciendo que para los científicos es muy difícil entender el sedimento, no saben cómo responder, hay muchos gaps en el conocimiento, pero digo, si tú has visto científicos que abordan eso de una forma más humilde, más democrática, más como honestamente, o la respuesta es mucho ingeniería como con resolver este problema del sedimento, problematizar el sedimento con una respuesta de obras. Tú nos muestras una obra gigantesca que van a construir, pero me gustaría saber si en estas colaboraciones interdisciplinarias, si has conocido otros científicos con otra forma de abordar su incertidumbre, sí, con el sedimento.
Bueno, con respecto a la primera, hay una cosa muy interesante. En el mundo de los que estudian los sedimentos, hay una cosa que se llama sediment balance. Porque digamos que en la imaginación de los ríos, un río con mucho sedimento y uno no le gusta, porque el río debe ser transparente, claro, entonces uno se imagina bañándose en el río transparente, pero esos ríos transparentes en realidad no son saludables, porque el sedimento permite muchas cosas de la vida, ¿no? Y en estas zonas donde yo trabajo, el sedimento es fundamental para la agricultura, porque cuando se desborda el río, inunda, lleva sedimento y eso permite le da vida a la tierra, ¿no? Entonces, es muy importante que haya sedimento. ¿Sí? Cuando el problema en donde el pueblo de Nuris es que dejó de haberlo y se fue la agricultura de una. Ya no hay más sedimento y agua fresca se fue, agua dulce se fue la vida. Y cuando la gente dice que hay mucho sedimento, pues es el problema. Entonces, ese concepto del balance, del sediment balance, es muy interesante porque es como reconocer que es necesario el sedimento, pero que en su exceso puede ser complicado. Entonces, en las ciencias sociales y críticas geográficas, y todo eso, a nosotros no nos gusta la palabra balance, porque eso suena a armonía. Y pues ya nos dijeron que no podemos hablar de armonía, porque no se puede, nadie vive en armonía con nada y la ecología dice que todo es caos y que ya es raro lo que... Entonces, pero para estas personas que estudian sedimentos sí es importante el ideal del sediment balance, precisamente porque si no hay sedimento, los deltas, el problema de los deltas es que se están hundiendo porque las represas no dejan bajar el sedimento. Pero si hay muchos sedimentos, es un lío. Entonces, ¿cuál es la salida? El sediment balance. Pero pues en geomorfología y eso sí es muy importante, pero en ciencias sociales no. Entonces estoy mirando cómo pensar en eso porque la gente se baña en el río con sedimento y hay un momento en el que usted se puede bañar y sale limpio con el sedimento allí. Pero cuando eso pasa a cierta cantidad, usted sale embarrado. Entonces, sí hay un balance en la vida cotidiana. Es en el que usted puede lavar la ropa con el agua del río y no le queda sucia, a pesar de que sí tiene sedimento. Pero pasa ese nivel y se le ensucia la ropa. Entonces, en la vida cotidiana sí hay un balance. ¿Sí? Pero toca mirar a ver cómo se dice, porque si no le dicen a un esencialista. Pero bueno, eso por ese lado. Pero uno ve las inconformidades de la gente, o es porque hay mucho o porque hay poco, no porque haya sedimento, ¿no? Porque lo necesitan de todas maneras, ¿no? Los mismos peces, ¿no? Los peces necesitan el sedimento, pero se pueden ahogar con el sedimento si hay más de lo normal, porque ellos también están adaptados a un nivel particular de sedimento. Entonces, ese nivel es el balance que tanto persiguen los que estudian estos temas desde el punto de vista físico. Entonces, tiene esa parte fértil y por eso yo digo que tiene como esa tensión entre la vida y la muerte, porque también el exceso de sedimento mata cosas, mata peces, mata cosas, genera conflictos y la desintegración del sedimento genera cosas. Bueno, eso es como multi... El mundo del sedimento también es chévere porque el sedimento es súper plástico. y son múltiples formas y cada forma trae una relación diferente con la gente. Entonces, no es una cosa definitiva. Y si uno se pone a pensar, yo, por ejemplo, una respuesta que no he encontrado es una definición de sedimento clara, porque es que sedimentos son muchas cosas, es la arena, es la arcilla, y además es toda la materia orgánica que está ahí. Entonces, si uno se pone a desarmarlo, no queda nada, porque le saca la materia orgánica, el animalito, la planta, todo, la arena, y que queda nada. Entonces, ¿qué sedimento? Es una cosa como un assemblage ahí todo raro, ¿no? Lo de la ingeniería es muy interesante porque, digamos que en esta región, que es todos los años se inunda y todos los años hay una tragedia y se rompe un dique o varios. Curiosamente, mucha del trabajo científico en agua y de ingeniería no habla de sedimentos directamente, e incluso hace poco estaba leyendo un paper de una persona que es como pues, muy reconocida en el mundo del agua, y decía, en lo científico y en lo político a la gente se le olvida que el río tiene sedimentos. Entonces se modelan el agua, pero los sedimentos no. Entonces, por ejemplo, en esta región del río San Jorge, esa región es el laboratorio de la adaptación al cambio climático en Colombia en este momento. Y allá están el único proyecto del protocolo de Kioto que se ha financiado en adaptación al cambio climático en Colombia es allá. Y el único proyecto del Climate Green Fund, no me acuerdo cómo se llama, que existe en Colombia es allá. Eso es una cantidad de plata. Allá ha llegado Naciones Unidas, allá estuvo el príncipe de Noruega una vez porque ellos daban plata para no sé qué. Yo escribí una historia sobre eso por ahí, sobre la llegada del príncipe allá. Y es tanta plata para producir conocimientos científicos sobre la zona de ingeniería, y mucho de eso no habla de sedimento. Entonces, pues porque meterse con sedimento es mucho más difícil, y tampoco expertos en sedimento, pues sí los hay, pero hablando con uno fue el que me dice, mire, llega un momento en el que yo tengo que empezar a asumir muchas cosas y yo ya me estoy aburriendo de eso, porque tengo que partir de muchos supuestos para poder hablar de sedimentos, porque hay muchos vacíos. Entonces, el paradigma de la ingeniería dominante en estas tierras, que refleja el paradigma de la ingeniería en el mundo, es el de controlar la inundación, controlar el río con el dique, canalizarlo, mantenerlo bajo control. Yo trabajo con un ingeniero en esa región, nos vamos a campo, que es el único ingeniero que me ha prestado atención, porque a los demás les parece que lo que uno hace pues no es interesante, pero hay uno que sí me presta atención, y él es como que, él es cercano como a un grupo de ingenieros que ellos entienden que tantas décadas de ingeniería controlando la naturaleza, lo que han mostrado son efectos adversos o resultados adversos. Ellos dicen, acá no vamos a poder hacer nada hasta que no entendamos que no podemos controlar la inundación, sino que nos toca vivir con ella. O sea, tenemos que aprender a vivir con las inundaciones. Y eso es un paradigma en ingeniería que se está cambiando, porque ya en otras partes del mundo lo están entendiendo. Por ejemplo, en Holanda ya hay un barrio que lo construyeron sobre la inundación, sobre el agua. Ya no es controlar la inundación, sino vivir con el agua. Y mucho de eso está inspirado en las comunidades que viven con las inundaciones, en el río Mekong, por ejemplo, y en muchas partes del mundo, ha sido inspirado en cómo la gente vive con la inundación, ¿no? Entonces sí hay algunos ingenieros que reconocen que tantos años de ese paradigma de controlar la naturaleza y el agua no es el que necesitamos, pero son ingenieros que no tienen poder de decisión en muchos campos, ¿no? Sino que son ingenieros que ven las cosas así, son muy críticos del conocimiento holandés, que eso es otra historia grande con respecto al conocimiento holandés sobre el agua en estas tierras tropicales. Los ingenieros dicen que los holandeses no entienden los ríos tropicales y que lo que piensa que todos los ríos son como los de los europeos. Bueno, eso son cosas ya diferentes, pero hay una cosa de historia del conocimiento. Acá hubo un holandés que sugirió desecar toda la región de la Mojana, donde está el río San Jorge, para acabar con ese problema y ya. Entonces, ahorita mismo lo que están haciendo es muy de modelación del agua y eso, pero es un agua sin sedimentos, es muy curioso. Y esto que les conté del río que se está muriendo, es una historia que ustedes no leen en ninguna parte de los documentos de los proyectos que están haciendo acá, ni del PNUD, ni en ninguna parte está esa historia del río muriéndose. A mí se me parece tan raro porque es tan evidente, pero no aparece, porque todo es el cuento de la restauración de humedales y la restauración de humedales y pues restauran los humedales, pero el río, así como los mismos pescadores también se van y quedan invisibles en esa historia porque no aparecen como gente de los ríos, sino como habitantes, pero no gente que vive de estar conectada con el río. Entonces, ahí hay otra historia interesante sobre los ingenieros y sobre los expertos en esta región, que es una cosa vieja, ¿no? Otra cosa loca, por ejemplo, fue la FAO que estuvo en los 70s en esta región y dijo, mira acá esta cantidad de pescado tan impresionante que tienen en todas estas ciénagas y ustedes pescando con flechas, con arpón, con eso no van a explotar la región como debe ser, hay demasiado pescado. Recomendaron la introducción de redes grandes. Y después, eso fue en los 70s, y después metieron redes y se acabó el pescado y la FAO volvió en el 2000 en un proyecto de desarrollo sostenible y dijo, oh, acabaron con el pescado. Porque esa historia de la FAO que recomendó meter redes grandes, eso no está por ahí. Entonces también hay una historia de esos conocimientos externos y demás bien interesante.
No, pues súper, Alejandro, gracias. Me encantaría hacer un intercambio sobre experiencias con ingenierías entre regiones, pues desde el Piedemonte allá, pero te digo, solo para darte otro ejemplo, lo que tú dices de los modelos de agua sin sedimento y en la misma gestión de riesgo después de la avenida, la avalancha en Mocoa, están construyendo las obras de puro agua baja. O sea, después de una avenida torrencial donde bajó la montaña entera, ¿sí? Y todos los modelos. Y por eso nosotros nos opusimos a las obras, hicimos cantidad de protestas y todo, porque las obras no están contemplando nada más que agua.
Es una
Lo que tú dices, sí, es muy fuerte. Pero bueno, no, interesante. Me encantaría que siguiéramos charlando sobre estos temas desde la comparación. Sí,
claro que sí.
el sedimento, sí. No sé si alguien más tiene una pregunta o un comentario. Tampoco en línea. Bueno, pues muchísimas gracias, Alejandro. Me encantó, realmente fue súper interesante. Nos provocaste muchas preguntas, algo conceptual muy, muy interesante también, metodológico, urgente. Entonces, pues te agradezco, les agradecemos, pues, y ojalá nos veamos ahora en Colombia. Pues sería muy interesante conversar con calma, ¿sí?
Claro que sí. Muchas gracias por la invitación.
No, gracias a ti. Estamos en contacto. Gracias.